A web service is a program that runs on the server. Here's an example of a simple web service which calculates the square root of a number. So if I type in 3 in the URL, then eventually it's going to give me the square root of 3. So that's a simple program, the simplest I can think of actually, of a program which runs on the server. Of course, we could calculate the square root on our own computer as a client app, but in this case I've asked it to run the program on the server so that we can access it through a URL. In this type of URL, as we know, we type in the URL is known as a GET, as distinct from a POST, which is normally through a form. But in this case, when we type the request through a URL to find the square root of 3 in this case, it's by means of what we call a GET. So let's start off by making a new project. We'll make a web API, so a new project, and we'll choose that core web app, and I'm going to call it and I'm going to put it into an easily accessible folder and choose API. I might as well run that. Eventually gives us a bit more than we asked for actually. It gives us some weather data. Let's see what that means. So let's take a look. We've got a model of sorts here, whatever that is for the moment, but we've got here a weather controller. Basically what that's doing, I don't want to go into this, I want to actually ignore it completely in a moment, but just for the record as to what it is, we've got here, we're creating our own make-believe weather data which we're going to place on the server, and that will be dished up and sent back to the client. So it's completely fake, made up of an array of types of weather and so on. So we are going to completely ignore that, and we're going to make our own controller. A controller, you may recall, is something really which responds to a URL. So let's start off by, we'll right click on here and we'll add. Now we'll add a controller. We could very well add a class which would be blank, but the advantage of using a controller is that it gives us some startup code in our C# file. Now we've got here an empty controller with read and write. This is basically when we're going to be doing CRUD, that is to say create, read, update and delete, which are very important. So we could come back to that. And also when we're using Entity Framework, now this presupposes that we've got a database in which our data is at the moment. So we will just choose an empty controller and we will call it mymath. And add that, and we get a very basic set of code here. Now we don't need this. This is basically displaying the index page, which is a view. So let's delete that, just have a look at it for the moment, but away it goes. And now we're going to provide our own API controller. So I will now provide another attribute which indicates that we're using a certain format where the controller is actually going to represent the name of the controller. It's called a tag. It's like a variable if you like, and then we're going to have a sorry, that should be qualifying the whole class. now we need to add a get function. And just to remind you, so far this ought to respond to just that URL. But we would like it to respond to the URL whereby we provide a parameter. For example, we're going to find the square root of 3, for example. So we need to indicate that in the get attribute, and we need to say we're going to return a double, and we're going to pass a parameter into our get, and it's complaining because I haven't got my return. We're going to return the square root of that number, which is given by that, and you'll notice that using system has appeared automatically, which is nice. Our namespace corresponding to the math. So let's run that, and we get the default behavior, which is calling up the weather forecast controller. I'll show you how to get rid of that default behavior, but in our case we're going to be using my math, and then we'll put the square, we put the 3 in again, and let's see if that, there we go, quite quickly calculates the square root of 3. We could try another number. Well, what I'll do as well is put a breakpoint in here, and I might just try another number. Nice easy one, the square root of 4, and let's see there, that quite nicely stops within the code, and we can see that that's got the value of 4, and that should therefore return the value of the square root, which is of course 2. So I'll just continue to run that and see that indeed we've got the answer of 2 from our service. Just to emphasize that this code is all placed on the server, effectively being uploaded to the server, and that code is running on the server, and that is the service to calculate the square root of a number. Incidentally, if we don't want this to appear automatically, we can go into our code and look at the launch settings, and we can see in there we could just delete that, and that would, or we might even replace it with our own and run that. And by default, therefore, our segment will come up, and then we can use that to find the square root of any number that we like. Notice the data has been returned as JSON. The alternative is XML, and I rather suspect that's the line which specifies that JSON is used rather than XML.